They sold her with a baby in her belly. Then a Lakota warrior broke every law for her. The wind was sharp that morning, the kind that got in your bones and stayed there. Not the kind that whistled playful or warm, but a cold that meant something. A cold that knew silence and had grown old in it. Her coat barely wrapped around her belly now, seams straining like they too didn't want to hold her anymore. She stood in the yard while the men spoke behind her. Smoke curled from the kitchen chimney like it was trying not to be noticed. The sky had the color of steel, and the ground held that dry kind of frost that didn't melt even when you breathed warm on it. She didn't speak, not because she was afraid, but because there was nothing left to say. Her name was Mary, but that felt far away now, like a coat she'd outgrown and left on a hook by the door of a house that wasn't home. 19 years behind her, and not one of them had taught her what to do when your own blood sells you like he's trading in a mule. She'd stopped crying 2 nights ago when her father told her the price. He hadn't looked at her, not really, just stood with the Baron and said things like fine stock and sturdy hips and good womb. She was there right in front of them, and somehow not in the room at all. She'd swallowed the sound in her throat and stood still while the floor shifted. Under her, the horse pawed at the frozen earth. The Baron's men loaded her one small sack onto the saddle. No one helped her up. That wasn't part of the deal. She moved slow, like a branch breaking in wind, and climbed up without a sound. The baby kicked once beneath her ribs. She put her hand there and whispered nothing. The Baron didn't speak until they were 2 hills out. "Don't expect softness," he said, like he was telling her about the weather. She didn't answer. He was a broad man, not tall, but wide with weight that looked like muscle once and turned to shadow. His face had the kind of beard that hid the shape of his mouth, and his eyes didn't rest on things. They pressed into them. He smelled of tobacco and blood and wood that had burned too long. The ride took most of the day, and she didn't ask where they were going. He didn't offer. Trees came and went bare and leaning. A creek ran beside them at one point, half frozen, talking to itself in murmurs. The sky started to fold down around the edges, and by the time they reached his land, it was more night than afternoon. The house was large, proud of itself in a lonely way, wood dark from age, not paint. One dog barked once and went quiet. A woman in a bonnet opened the door, eyes low, and disappeared before they stepped inside. There were no introductions, no welcome. Just the sound of her boots on the floor and the fire crackling like it didn't want to share its warmth. "This is your room," he said, and led her down a hallway with no pictures. It had a bed, a window, a stove cold as bone. The mattress was flat but cleaner than she'd expected. She turned to face him, but he was already gone. She sat down and let her hands rest on her knees. The baby turned again. She whispered something soft and meaningless. Just rhythm. Just sound. The walls didn't echo. Days came like grey sheets pulled one after the other. The Baron didn't touch her, but he didn't leave her alone either. He watched, always just near enough to make her feel like she was never alone in a room, even if he wasn't there. He said little. When he did, it was about work, meals, her. Wait, the child. She learned the patterns, when to step out of the way, when not to answer, when not to breathe too loud. She ate in silence with the others, though they never spoke to her. The cook, an older woman with burn scars up both arms, left a piece of honeycomb on her plate once. Just once. She didn't do it again. The next morning, her lip was split. No one asked why. When the pains came, she didn't scream. She folded herself on the mattress and bit the pillow until it tasted of earth. Hours passed. She thought maybe it would kill her, thought maybe it should. The baby came in the dark, slippery and still. For a moment she thought he wasn't breathing. Her heart stopped, and then so did the world. But then a whimper, a soft, strange cry like the world didn't quite deserve him. She cut the cord with her teeth, wrapped him in the last shawl her mother ever touched. She didn't name him. Not yet. Not in this place. Names were for safe things. She sang to him instead. Just the old hum her grandmother used to carry while shelling beans, a melody with no end. The Baron didn't come to see the child. Didn't ask its weight, just said, "You'll be back to work in 3 days." She nodded, but she wouldn't. The days blurred. The baby didn't cry often, only when she left the room. Only when the wind howled just right and pushed its way through. The cracks in the frame. She fixed the cracks with cloth, sat up each night watching the walls breathe and making sure the fire didn't die. Winter rolled in slow. The Baron stayed inside more. He drank more too. Slower movements, longer stares, less patience. She started taking the baby out each morning, wrapped in layers of shawls and silence. Not far, just past the fence, just enough to remember the sound of leaves, even if they'd all fallen. Sometimes she thought she saw something move between the trees. A deer, a shadow, a memory. One morning, she found a smooth stone beside the path, shaped like a heart. Not perfect, but close. She picked it up and tucked it into her pocket. The baby liked to look at the sky, wide eyes, open mouth, like it was singing something back to him. That night, she rocked him by the fire. The house was quieter than usual. No footsteps upstairs, no dogs, just wind. She didn't hear him come. Into the door. Just saw the shadow stretch across the floor like a warning. The Baron stood there a long while, watching them. She didn't flinch, just kept humming. The baby reached up with one hand and touched her chin. "You think I'm a cruel man," the Baron said, not asking. She didn't answer. There were no words to say that wouldn't make it worse. "You owe me a name," he said then. She didn't give it, not hers, not the baby's. He walked away. She waited until his footsteps were gone, then reached for the stone in her pocket. Held it against her palm like it could protect them, like it could whisper back. The fire snapped just once. She closed her eyes. The baby slept without fear. And for a moment, just a moment, the wind outside didn't sound like morning. It sounded like a beginning. The snow came early that year, and it came quiet, the kind that made the world look like it had been washed in sleep. Each flake fell like it was afraid to break the silence. The first morning she woke to white on the window pane. She sat by it. For hours, the baby curled against her chest, both of them wrapped in the shawl with the broken stitch near the edge. She didn't speak, not even to him. Words felt too heavy for mornings like this. Time slowed inside that house. The Baron didn't notice the snow, or if he did, he didn't speak of it. He moved through the halls like a weight dragged behind something broken. His anger came quieter now, not in blows or shouting, but in how he left the door open when wind howled, or how he poured soup into the fire just because she looked at it too long. Sometimes she caught him watching the child, not with malice, but with a hollow gaze, like trying to remember what something was for. She stopped eating at the table, said the baby needed quiet, sleep, warmth. No one argued. It became easier to vanish inside her corner of the house. The walls were thin, but solitude is a kind of armor, and she learned how to wear it well. When the baby began to babble, she didn't hush him. She let him coo and cluck and murmur at the ceiling like he was telling it secrets. She whispered stories into his hair, not tales with beginnings or ends, just strands of sound her mother used to hum while folding linens or brushing out knots. She named him in secret, whispered it only when they were outside in the wind where no one could steal it. Jonas, the name belonged to no one she knew. It was soft, clean. It tasted like river water and things that hadn't happened yet. She walked farther each day, Jonas tied to her chest in a sling she made from one of the Baron's old shirts. Past the fence, beyond the tall grass, into the thin woods where the trees bent low and the sun moved slow. She brought no weapon. Just a small carving knife she kept hidden in her boot, not for fear of man, but for memory's sake. It had been her brother's once, long gone to war and dust. On the third day of snow, she found the woman. She was crouched near a hollow stump, white hair tucked beneath a strip of red cloth, hands stained with roots and sap. She didn't look up when Mary stepped closer, just muttered something about frost-bitten violets and stubborn soil. The baby gurgled, and the woman turned her head a little, not quite a smile, more like a nod the trees might give. "You'll want burdock for fever," she said, "and willow for the gums when teeth come. Baby bones chew the world before they know it." Mary didn't ask who she was. Names were fragile things. She just stood there, letting her breath curl up like mist. "You live at his place," the woman said, not unkindly. Her tone was like worn leather. No need for question marks. "I live nearby," Mary answered. The woman cackled once, low and without. "Cruelty. Well, so do the ghosts." Mary came back the next day and the day after, always with Jonas tied snug, always with her boots quiet on the frost. She brought the old woman bread once. In return, the woman taught her how to mix pine resin with bear grease to seal wounds, how to brew a sleep tea from chamomile, yarrow, and quiet prayers. Her hands began to remember things her mother used to do. Her back stopped aching from fear. She asked once if the woman had a name. "I did," she said, and left it there. When she returned home that evening, she found the Baron waiting by the door. He said nothing, just looked at her, then the baby, then at her boots. She stepped past him without breaking her stride. He didn't follow. That night, she laid Jonas on the floor beside the stove, wrapped in 2 blankets and her old coat. He slept easy, mouth open just slightly, fingers curled in tiny fists. She carved a bird from a piece of scrap wood she found behind the barn. Nothing fancy, just the shape. She smoothed the edges with the knife from her boot, left it beside his hand before sleeping. The next morning, it was gone. She found it broken, snapped at the wing, on the hearth beside a scuffed boot print. She didn't cry, just picked it up and held it in her palm a while, then tossed the pieces into the fire and watched them burn. That afternoon she went deeper into the woods, past where she usually turned back. Jonas was quiet, his breath steady, against her collarbone. She found a pine grove, all tall and watching, and there at the base of the biggest tree, another carving, a horse this time. Simple, worn smooth from hands, left on a flat stone like an offering. She stood very still. The trees said nothing, but the wind seemed to hold its breath. She picked up the horse, held it close, then tucked it into her coat. That night she held Jonas close to the fire again and didn't hum. She just listened. For what, she didn't know. The Baron didn't speak to her for days. He came and went, drank, watched. And when he slept, he left the door unlatched, like he forgot how to keep the cold out. She bolted it behind him and sat with her back to it. One morning Jonas coughed. It was small at first, a scratch in the throat, but by evening it had turned to something wetter, something with weight. His breath came ragged, like walking uphill. She wrapped him tight and ran to the old woman's hut. "He's burning," she said, holding him out like a question. The woman took him without a word, laid him on a bed of moss and fur, mixed herbs by hand, pressed a bundle to his chest and another to his feet, murmured things too low to catch. Mary sat by the fire, shaking. "He'll stay," the woman said at dawn, "but he'll carry the storm with him. He'll feel the cold deeper than most." She carried Jonas home, wrapped in the warmest things she had. When she got there, a bundle was waiting on the step. Inside, dried mint, willow bark, and the horse carving. She turned slowly toward the trees. Nothing. But she felt it. Someone. Watching, but not like the Baron. Watching the way you do when you want someone to be safe. She kept the bundle, hid it beneath the bed, set the horse where Jonas could see it. The days came slow again, but softer now. Jonas got stronger. His cough faded to a wheeze, then to silence. The Baron stayed drunk longer, slept through mornings, said nothing when she left for walks. Once she caught him staring at the stove like he didn't remember how it worked. She started carving again, small things. A fox, a feather, a hand with fingers curled like a blessing. She never spoke of the horse, never spoke of the one who left it, but every now and then she felt him nearby. Not like a presence, more like a promise. One morning, near the edge of the pines, she saw a figure, not close, not threatening, just still. She didn't move toward him, didn't wave. She only stood, Jonas warm on her chest, and let the moment pass like smoke. When she turned back toward the house, the snow began to fall again. Slower this time. Like it knew something had shifted, something had started that couldn't be undone. That night, as Jonas slept, she laid the horse carving beside him and whispered his name aloud for the first time in the house. Jonas. The walls didn't flinch. The fire stayed lit, and in her chest, something old and broken dared to lift its head. Not hope, not yet, but something just under it, something that breathed slower than fear. The wind moved differently the day he came, not louder, just more certain, like it knew which direction mattered. She was near the creek with Jonas tucked tight against her chest, collecting smooth stones to ring the fire back home. His cough had gone, but his breath still came a little shallow some mornings, and she found comfort in tasks that made her hands remember life before the house. The trees had lost the last of their leaves, and the light was that cold kind of gold that looked like it came through stained glass. She felt him before she saw him, a stillness in the trees, the hush of something alive but not moving. She turned slowly. He stood maybe 20 paces off, between two pines, one hand resting on the neck of a dark horse that didn't twitch. He wore no hat, no gloves, just a blanket over one shoulder and eyes that didn't ask questions. He said nothing. Neither did she. The baby stirred and made a soft sound, but didn't cry. The warrior's gaze shifted toward the small bundle of blankets, and something unreadable moved behind his expression. Not pity, not curiosity, just something real. She didn't run. She didn't step forward either. She only tightened the shawl a little around Jonas, nodded once, and then turned away, not fearfully, just as if the moment had said what it needed to. By the time she reached the edge of the trees, she looked back. He was gone. That night, she lit the fire with care, fingers careful around the twigs, like they might be bones. Jonas slept with the horse carving near his hand again, and she sat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching the flames flicker and fall. The wind howled once through the cracks, and then all was still. The next morning she found a trail of small stones arranged in a spiral by the fence post, each one pale, flat, shaped like a drop of rain. She didn't touch them, just stood there and let the meaning settle somewhere deep beneath her ribs. The old woman in the woods said his name only once. He was her brother's boy, she explained, after watching Mary wrap Jonas with shaking hands and glance more than once toward the pines. He was young when they came. The Baron's men took his sister, burned their horses, left her earrings on a fence like a trophy. He doesn't talk much now, but he walks far. Mary didn't ask anything else. Some stories needed silence more. And then sound. The warrior didn't appear again for 4 days, then 5. She found another carving instead, this one a small handprint, smoothed out of clay and left to dry on a flat rock near the creek. It fit inside her palm exactly. She carried it home and placed it near the fire, beside the only thing the Baron hadn't taken or broken. Jonas laughed for the first time that night. A real laugh, gurgling and bright, like river water over clean stones. The house felt different when he laughed. The Baron hadn't returned yet. Gone on some business with men who rode in loud and left louder. She'd had 3 days of quiet, and every second felt like a breath she'd been holding finally let go. On the 6th morning, as frost laced, the grass and the sun blinked through a patch of thin cloud. The warrior was there again, this time closer, standing at the edge of the woods, just far enough to respect distance, just near enough to be seen. She stepped out into the open, not hurrying. He waited. She didn't speak. He lifted something in his hands, a small pouch, the kind used for herbs or offerings. He placed it on a stump between them and stepped back. She moved forward slowly, cradling Jonas with one hand and reaching with the other. The pouch was soft, tied with sinew, smelling faintly of sage and dust. When she looked up, he was already fading into the trees. That night, she opened the pouch beside the fire. Inside, dried leaves she couldn't name, a feather the color of storm clouds, and a stone carved with a spiral etched deep. Jonas stirred beside her and smiled in his sleep. She didn't return the next day, or the one after. Something about the silence between them made her careful not to touch it too often, like a thread pulled taut. But on the 3rd day, she brought a carving of her own, a small wolf, its shape still rough, ears too short, but the body honest. She placed it on the same stump and walked away. The wind picked up and snow danced like ash in the light. He didn't come that day, but when she passed by again the next morning, the carving was gone. In its place, a piece of cloth, old, torn, dyed deep with a pattern she'd never seen before. She folded it, held it close, didn't know why it mattered, only that it did. The Baron returned 2 nights later, sour and bruised. Something had gone wrong on his trip. His boots were muddy, his hands scraped raw. He didn't look at her when he entered, just dropped his coat on the floor and poured himself a drink that sloshed onto the table. She kept Jonas quiet, moving slow and careful, like wind through wheat. The house filled with a tension that smelled of sweat and whiskey and things unspoken. He slammed the door to his room behind him. The next morning, Mary stepped outside to find footprints in the frost, not from the house, not hers. Boot prints, fresh, leading to the woods, stopping, watching. She looked out toward the trees. Nothing moved, but her pulse did, faster, like hooves in the distance. That evening the Baron asked why the baby had a new blanket, asked where she'd gotten it. The tone in his voice was quiet, too quiet. She told him she'd mended it from scraps. He stared too long, didn't press. But she caught him that night, standing at the window long after the fire died, looking toward the woods like they owed him something. She didn't sleep. Jonas breathed soft beside her. The wind didn't howl. It waited. The next time she saw the warrior, he wasn't alone. A dog followed him, thin, scarred, eyes too smart for a mutt. It didn't bark, just watched her as he placed another bundle near the stump. She walked forward. He stayed this time, not far, just close enough for the silence between them to feel like a conversation. She picked up the bundle. Inside, a flint, a small blade, and a dried sprig of sweetgrass. She looked up. He nodded once, then turned, the dog following without command. She whispered, "Thank you," barely louder than breath. Whether he heard or not, she couldn't say. But something in the trees shifted, and something inside her unknotted. She carved that night, not an animal, not a symbol. A figure, tall, still, wrapped in a blanket. Not perfect, but true. She set it on the hearth, and didn't hide it. When the Baron came downstairs the next morning, she met his eyes. He looked at the figure, didn't say a word, didn't need to. He knew. Something had changed. The walls knew it. The fire knew it. Even the wind, when it passed through the cracks and danced around the room, carried it in its breath. He didn't speak of it, but that night she bolted the door from inside, and the warrior watched from the trees, silent, steady, not waiting, just there. And somehow that was enough. The days were growing sharper, Cold didn't come in gusts anymore. It settled like a second skin. Frost etched the windows by dawn, and the trees looked more like bones than branches now. Mary moved through the house with the kind of stillness that came from too many days learning when not to breathe too loud. Jonas had started to crawl, clumsy and determined, dragging himself across the wooden floor like he was chasing something he could see, but no one else could. The Baron noticed, not with affection, but with a scowl that lingered longer than usual. He watched the child now in that same way he watched storms, disapproving, wary, silent. She never let Jonas out of her sight. One morning, the Baron kicked a chair across the kitchen because his coat was wet. The next day, he broke a plate, just to hear it shatter. When Mary didn't flinch, he stared at her like he'd missed a step on the stairs. He left again briefly on horseback with two men who never came inside. Said he'd be back by dusk, said not to touch the storeroom, said she should know her place. She watched him ride away, then stepped out past the fence before his shadow, left the ridge. The woods didn't feel cold. They felt honest. She didn't call out, didn't search, just walked. Past the familiar trees, to the place where the light always cut at an angle like a blade. The warrior was there. He sat on a fallen trunk, sharpening a thin blade with a stone that caught glints of sun. The dog was near his feet, tail thudding once in recognition. Mary stood a moment, just watching him. Jonas made a soft sound from the sling across her chest. The warrior looked up. She didn't speak, neither did he, but he stood and walked to a spot between them and the creek. And there, he began stacking wood. Not for show, not rushed, just the kind of movement that has purpose without words. She knelt beside him, helped. They built the fire together, no questions, no instructions. And when it burned low and steady, she sat with Jonas in her lap, the flames between them all. She gave him a small bundle then, tied with blue thread. Inside, a carved feather and a strip of cloth from Jonas's old wrap. He nodded once. Not thanks, just acknowledgement. They sat that way until the sun shifted and the cold crept closer. When she rose, he offered her a pouch. Dried berries, thin strips of cured meat. She accepted, walked home with Jonas asleep against her, felt the weight of the food in one hand and something else in her chest, heavier, quieter, like a warmth she wasn't ready to name. The Baron returned late, drunk again. Threw his boots at the wall, asked if she'd stolen anything. Said she looked different. She said nothing. He stared at her a long time, then laughed to himself and stumbled toward his room. She bolted the door once he disappeared down the hall. The next few days were quiet, the kind of quiet that's neither peace nor fear, just the long breath between what you hope and what you know. She saw the warrior again on the second morning. After the frost turned the fields brittle, he had a fresh cut on his cheek. His left hand was bandaged. She didn't ask, he didn't explain, but he handed her a pouch of salve, thick and fragrant, laced with pine and something sharper. She touched his hand gently, not out of affection, out of thanks. That night, Jonas wouldn't sleep, teeth coming in, pain blooming behind his gums. She rocked him until her arms trembled, then laid him on the old fur rug and sang the low sound her grandmother once hummed over boiling corn. The Baron stood in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come down. He stared at the fire, at Jonas, then at her. His eyes didn't hold anger this time, just that awful emptiness. The kind that says, "You're not mine, but you should have been." He walked away without a word. The next morning she found the wolf carving missing from the hearth. She knew he had taken it. She didn't look for it. Instead, she left another. At the edge of the woods, a mother bird, wings wrapped tight around a smaller one. When she returned later that day, it was gone. And in its place, a necklace of carved bone beads strung with twine and care. She wore it, not for beauty, for belonging. One dusk, she found a feather stuck in the fence post. Dark, long, curved like a question. She tucked it into her hair without thinking. When she turned, the warrior stood halfway down the hill. Not close, not far, just present. They walked together for a while, not speaking. Jonas asleep in the sling between them. The dog loping a few steps ahead. He stopped once, near a stream, and crouched. Drew a shape in the frost with a twig. A circle, a line, a second smaller circle. Then he looked at her. She understood none of it, but she knelt beside him, and with her finger drew a heart. Not neat, not perfect, just true. He didn't smile, but something in his face softened. They parted as always. No promises, just a look, just breath. That night, she dreamed of firelight on snow and a voice she couldn't remember saying her name like it meant something again. The Baron grew restless. He watched her more, said less, moved things in the night. Her shoes, the kettle, the bundle of dried herbs she kept near the fire. Nothing ruined, just disturbed. She locked her door. At night, slept with Jonas beside her, kept the knife beneath her pillow. She knew something was building, not yet, but close. When she went to the woods now, she didn't walk alone. The warrior waited for her each time. They didn't share stories, didn't talk about the past. But in the way he handed her a cup of water, in the way he tied the wrap tighter around Jonas's shoulders when the wind picked up, there was knowing. There was care. He carved her a new comb, the teeth fine and strong, the handle smooth as river rock. She hadn't touched her hair with anything but her fingers in months. That night, she combed through the tangles while Jonas slept, and for the first time her hands didn't tremble. The Baron saw the comb the next day, said nothing, just took her wrist for a second too long. Not hard, just to let her know he could. She didn't pull back, didn't flinch, just looked at him until he let go. That evening she left a feather and a strip of ribbon in the woods. She found in return a small bundle of dried flowers tied with sinew, lavender, yarrow, and wild. Mint, protection, sleep, healing. She pressed them into the folds of Jonas's sling. One morning the Baron said he was leaving again. 3 days. He packed quietly, didn't slam the door. She didn't ask where he was going, just waited until she saw the dust of his horse vanish over the hill, then stepped out into the woods. The warrior met her halfway down the trail. This time, when they walked together, he didn't keep the space between them. Their shoulders brushed once, gently, like the beginning of a thought. At the clearing, he crouched beside the fire pit and laid down a blanket, spread food between them. Flatbread, smoked fish, a hard cheese that crumbled at the edge. They ate without speaking. Jonas gummed the bread and made soft, delighted sounds. The dog dozed near the fire. Mary leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could measure, she felt no edge to herself. She felt whole. The warrior didn't move. When she opened her eyes again, he was watching her. Not with desire, not with hunger, just with the kind of attention people forget they deserve. Like she mattered, like she was more than what had been done to her. When she rose to leave, she touched his hand, left hers there for a moment longer than needed. He didn't move, didn't pull away. But when she stepped into the trees again, heart full, air quiet, something behind her whispered without sound. Not goodbye, not yet, but stay. The storm came, without warning, not in the sky, but in the sound of hooves and the weight of silence that followed. Mary had known it would come in some form someday. The kind of knowing that settles in the gut, not the mind. It was early morning, frost still clinging to the porch rail when she saw the dust rise beyond the ridge. One rider, no pack, no cart, just speed and force and the kind of purpose that makes the birds stop singing. She didn't panic. She wrapped Jonas to her chest, tight and high, so he wouldn't feel her trembling. She moved through the house slow, gathering only what mattered, her knife, the carved wolf, the pouch of dried herbs the warrior had given her. She didn't take clothes, she didn't take bread. When she stepped onto the back porch, the wind slapped her like it knew what was coming. She didn't cry. She ran. Into the woods, into the place where the trees knew her name and the ground didn't echo. The wind carried the sound of hooves across the valley, fast, gaining. She didn't look back. The sling around her shoulders dug deep. Jonas stirred but didn't cry. Her breath caught like a stitch in the ribs, but she kept going, past the hollow stump, past the place where she first saw the spiral stones, past the clearing, to the fire pit. Empty. No dog, no warrior, only cold ash. She turned in a circle, chest heaving. He wasn't here. She couldn't scream, didn't dare. She crouched, shielding Jonas with both arms, knees in the frost, the world closing in like a mouth. Her hand found the knife beneath her coat, clenched the handle like prayer, and then a whisper in the branches, not a voice, a movement. He stepped from the trees with a bow in hand and eyes like dusk. The warrior said nothing. He didn't have to. He knelt beside her, touched Jonas's forehead gently, then stood and turned, his face toward the sound of hooves coming fast. Mary opened her mouth. He shook his head once. Stay. That's all it meant. He walked to the edge of the clearing. The horse crested the hill, a black mass with steam at the mouth. The Baron rode it like a man who'd run out of things to own and found only fury left to ride. He didn't stop, not until he saw the warrior standing alone. The reins jerked, the horse skidded. The Baron dismounted before it had fully stopped, gun already drawn, breath clouding in front of him like smoke. "She's mine," he said. Not a shout, a fact. The warrior didn't answer. "You think silence makes you noble? Think I won't shoot. A savage dead for stealing what belongs to me." Mary stepped forward then, not fast, but steady. She stood between them. Jonas pressed to her chest, her shoulders trembling but her back straight. "I'm not yours," she said. The words cracked in, the air like dry wood. The Baron's hand flinched. He looked at her, and for the first time there was something behind his eyes besides control. Something like confusion. "You were sold." "No," she said. "I was abandoned. You only picked up what no one else wanted." His mouth twisted. He raised the gun. The warrior moved. No shout, no threat, just movement, fast and precise. The arrow lodged in the Baron's shoulder before the shot fired. His arm jerked back, gun clattering to the ground. He screamed, not in pain, but disbelief. "You!" he spat. Another arrow answered, this one in his thigh. He dropped to one knee, cursing, bleeding, still trying to reach the weapon. Mary stepped forward and kicked it away. The warrior knocked a third arrow but didn't release it. The Baron looked up at her, mouth stained red, eyes wide. "You're nothing without me." She crouched, looked him dead in the face. "I was nothing with you." He reached for her, slow and feeble. She stood. He fell. She turned to the warrior, nodded once. He lowered the bow. The dog appeared from the trees then, silent, tail low, pacing toward the fallen man. It didn't growl, just stared at him like it saw something no one else ever had. The Baron moaned, still alive, but bleeding fast into the earth. "Let him go," Mary said. The warrior looked at her, the kind of look that asked if she was sure. She nodded. He left them there. The three of them walked away, Mary, Jonas, and the man who never spoke first. She didn't look back. Not even once. The path they took was narrow, hidden, a trail used by deer and memory. The sun began to rise in full now, gold slicing through the frost, warming the earth inch by inch. They walked for hours, no words, just footsteps and breath, and the weight of something finally ended. They reached the base of the ridge by late morning, a place where the trees parted, where water sang over rocks and moss made pillows out of stone. "Here," he said. His voice was low, rough like bark, but steady. Mary turned, startled. She hadn't expected speech. She smiled just once. They built the cabin together, not big, not fast, but right. Logs stacked with care, mud and straw packed between, a roof slanted against wind, a fire pit ringed with the stones she once gathered. In silence, days turned into weeks. Jonas began to walk, his steps unsure but determined. He chased the dog, who tolerated him with saint-like patience. Mary carved again, animals, figures, memories she wanted to hold in wood. The warrior hunted, brought back deer, fish, once a fox too injured to save. He buried it behind the cabin without a word. They never spoke of the Baron again. One evening, as the sky blushed into dusk and the wind danced without teeth, Mary stood at the doorway watching Jonas sleep on a blanket of furs. The warrior came to stand beside her. She reached for his hand, held it, not tightly, not out of fear, but out of choice. He didn't pull away. The trees rustled gently, and the stars began to emerge like old friends. The cold would come again. It always did. But this time it wouldn't find her alone. This time the door was locked from the inside, and the fire didn't just burn. It welcomed, and somewhere, deep in the woods, where silence used to stalk, her steps and grief sat heavy like snow. Something bloomed, not loudly, not all at once, but enough. Enough to live, enough to stay, enough to call it home.